Well, it's good to be together one more time as we continue our chronological study through the entire New Testament. And we're finishing up slowly the Epistle of James. We've come through 4 chapters so far. We believe this is the first epistle of all the epistles in the New Testament that was penned. And we're starting today in James chapter 5. And I'll tell you what, the last few verses of James chapter 4 really were eye-openers and really heart killers. We really have to examine ourselves, and it's not going to be any different as we make our way into James chapter 5. So we're going to take it slowly because there's some really interesting passage here that begins in verse number 1 with these words, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries which are coming upon you." And so it's a clear warning to a certain category of people, the rich, of what awaits them in their ultimate futures. They'll be facing some kind of miseries which they should be weeping and howling about now. Now we know that Jesus said that when people are cast into hell, that's the place where there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so I think this is perhaps a reference to that. Remember, Jesus warned that it's very difficult for those who are wealthy to enter the kingdom of heaven. Easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And the reason is quite clear, because the rich, generally speaking, selfishly only care for themselves and don't care about others, and lay up treasures for themselves on the earth rather than laying up treasure in heaven, which is what Jesus told all of his disciples to do. All right, and as we continue reading in this 5th chapter, we're going to see that there's no doubt, once again, we're going to read a reference to Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount, because James talks about that very thing, laying up treasures on this earth. Now, I do want to start off, of course, by, as I always mention, we always need to read everything in its context. And when James says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you," is he speaking carte blanche against everyone and anyone who has any degree of wealth? Well, that would seem doubtful, because he's already given high compliments to a guy by the name of Abraham, who was extremely wealthy by the Bible's own witness and testimony, earlier in chapter 2 of James. And we're about to read a little later on here in James where he gives big kudos to a guy by the name of Job, who himself was at least a millionaire in his day, maybe a multimillionaire, is just his net worth in livestock alone. Okay, so it seems doubtful that James is saying, "Come now, you rich," like Abraham and Job, weep and howl for the miseries which are coming upon you. That would seem unlikely, wouldn't it? Okay? And we're going to see clearly as we keep reading and get the context of verse 1 that he's talking specifically about unrighteous wealthy people, people who are, in fact, storing up their treasure on the earth, not laying it up in heaven, have no concern for the poor, and in fact are actually ripping people off, cheating others in order to gain their wealth. Okay? So that becomes clear. In verse number 2, he says, and now this helps us understand who they are, "Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten." Well, what rots in our earthly experience? Well, only perishable things, generally speaking, like food rots. And so James is telling us here that food itself could fall into that category of laying up treasures on the earth. And it shouldn't surprise us so much. When John the Baptist was preaching and people were convicted and they said, "What should we do?" The very first thing that he said was, "Whoever has 2 coats, share with him who has none, and whoever has food, do likewise." And so if we have food that rots, well, obviously it rotted because we didn't need it. Why didn't we share it with someone who could have used it? It's a glaring indication of one's, lack of concern for those who need it. again, I'm going to qualify that as well because, many people who are watching this program are watching in countries that have economic systems and governments that are like none other in human history, where there's all kinds of social safety nets and programs to help the poor paid through by tax dollars and so forth. And then we have great abuses of all that. And so all that comes into play. Unlike James's contemporary readers, you're probably not going to walk outside your door and see a mother and her children begging there who are starving. Right? Okay. So a little different situation than what we have. It doesn't let us off the hook, that we ought to be concerned for the least of these and for the poor around this world, and that we ought to be doing something. It's just that times have changed to some degree. So your riches have rotted, your food has rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Well, that's a clear reference to the words of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 6. He said in verse number 19, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth," there it is, "and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." So earthly treasure can be reflected in an abundance of unneeded clothing. Because we know, of course, that moths historically only eat clothing not the clothing that you're wearing, but the clothing that you've put, deep into your recesses of your closet or up in your attic or whatever that you don't normally wear. And you have to use mothballs to repel them, to keep them from eating that clothing and so on. This is all true before the days of synthetic fabrics when we used to have to use mothballs. Okay, but still, it shows a sin, a flaw in the character of the rich that James is condemning. There are other people who don't have any clothes or who are going cold for lack of clothing, but the rich have clothing that has become moth-eaten, and this grieves God. Okay, well, this is serious stuff. You don't hear this preached in many modern Western churches because people aren't interested in hearing it, but we're going to talk about it more when we get together again. So I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.